Most people think learning feels like progress. It feels smooth. It feels like reading a chapter, highlighting lines, nodding your head and saying, yes, that makes sense. But that's not learning. That's familiarity. And familiarity is a very convincing liar. You can read something 10 times and still not understand it. Real learning begins the moment you try to explain what you think you know, and suddenly you can't. That little moment of embarrassment. That's gold, because real learning is not about storing information. It's about reorganizing your ignorance. When you truly learn something, you can take it apart. You can rebuild it. You can explain it in simple words without hiding behind jargon. If you need big words to protect your explanation, that's usually a warning sign. Big words are often camouflage for confusion. People were never told that confusion is not a weakness, it's a signal. If you're never confused, you're probably not learning. You read just collecting sentences. Real learning feels like this. You hit a wall. You think you understand something. Then you try to apply it. It breaks. Now you're irritated. Good. That irritation means reality just corrected you. Reality is an excellent teacher because it doesn't care about your confidence. Memorization makes you feel smart. Understanding makes you humble. And humility is the doorway to clarity. There's another thing no one tells you. Speed is irrelevant. You can rush through 10 books and understand nothing. Or you can wrestle with one idea for a week and come out transformed. Learning is not a race. It's a reconstruction process. You are literally rewiring how you see the world. If an idea doesn't change the way you look at something, you probably didn't learn it. You just recorded it. Real learning also requires play. That sounds strange. Learning is supposed to be serious, right? But the mind works best when it's curious, not afraid. If you're scared of being wrong, you won't experiment. And if you don't experiment, you won't discover where your understanding collapses. Discovery only happens when you test your ideas. Try explaining the concept to an imaginary 12-year-old. Strip it down. Remove the decorations. If it falls apart, good. Now you know exactly where to look. The gap in your explanation is the map to your next breakthrough. Another secret, repetition isn't about reading again, it's about rebuilding again. Each time you revisit an idea, don't reread it, reconstruct it from scratch. Ask, why does this work? Then ask, what would happen if it didn't? Push it until it resists. Knowledge becomes solid when it survives pressure. And here's the most uncomfortable truth. Real learning makes you aware of how much you don't know. At first, that feels discouraging, but it's actually progress. When your awareness of ignorance increases, your understanding is expanding. The horizon of your knowledge is getting wider, and so is the boundary of what you can see. The goal isn't to feel intelligent. The goal is to become less wrong over time. Every subject, every skill, every field, they all reward the same behavior: curiosity, honesty, and the courage to say, I don't understand this yet. Notice the word yet. Learning is not about protecting your ego. It's about confronting it. When you stop trying to look smart and start trying to see clearly, everything changes. Questions become more important than answers. Simplicity becomes more valuable than complexity, and truth becomes more important than approval. No one told you that real learning is messy. It's slow, it's frustrating, it forces you to admit gaps. It makes you rebuild your mental models piece by piece. But when it clicks, when you truly understand something, it feels different. It feels clean, simple, obvious, not because it was easy, but because you earned it. And once you've earned that kind of understanding, no one can take it away from you. Most people confuse familiarity with understanding, and that confusion quietly destroys real learning. You read a chapter, you underline important lines, you watch a lecture, you nod your head. Everything feels smooth, it feels clear. You say to yourself, yes, that makes sense. But the feeling of something making sense is not the same thing as actually understanding it. It's just recognition, and recognition is very cheap. If I show you the solution to a math problem and walk you through it step by step, it can feel obvious. Each step seems logical when you're looking at it. But close the book and try to solve a similar problem on your own. Suddenly, the clarity evaporates. That's when you discover whether you understood it or merely followed it. Following is not understanding. Real understanding means you can recreate the idea from scratch. You can arrive at the conclusion without leaning on the original explanation. You can explain why each step works, not just repeat that it works. If you remove the notes, the slides, the highlighted lines, and the idea collapses, then it was never truly yours. Familiarity gives you a dangerous sense of confidence. The brain loves patterns. When it sees something repeatedly, it starts to feel comfortable. Comfort then gets mistaken for mastery, but comfort simply means you've seen it before. It doesn't mean you can use it, apply it, or teach it. Try something simple. Take any concept you believe you understand. Now explain it out loud as if you're speaking to someone who has never heard of it before. No technical words, no hiding behind definitions, just plain language. Very quickly you'll notice where your explanation becomes vague. You'll use phrases like basically, or it kind of works like, or you just, those are warning signs. That's the exact spot where familiarity is pretending to be knowledge. Understanding has weight, it has structure, it connects to other ideas. Familiarity is thin, it floats on the surface. This is why rereading is one of the most deceptive study methods. The second time you read something, it feels easier. The third time, even easier. You start finishing sentences in your head before they're done. It feels like progress. But what's really happening is recognition is increasing, not comprehension. You're strengthening the memory of the words, not the logic behind them. Real learning begins when you remove support, close the book, take a blank page, write down everything you know about the topic, derive the formula, reconstruct the argument, draw the diagram from memory. That struggle, that uncomfortable mental stretching, is where understanding is built. The brain has to reorganize the idea instead of simply absorbing it. And here's something even more important. Understanding allows flexibility. If you truly understand something, you can look at it from different angles. You can answer unexpected questions about it. You can apply it in unfamiliar situations. Familiarity cannot do that. Familiarity only works in the exact form you saw it before. You don't truly understand gravity if you can only recite the equation. You understand it when you can explain why astronauts float, why planets orbit, and why objects fall, all without memorized lines. The goal of learning is not to recognize information, it's to internalize principles. Recognition feels fast and satisfying. Understanding feels slow and sometimes frustrating. But one disappears under pressure, and the other becomes stronger. So the next time something feels clear, don't trust the feeling. Test it, break it, explain it simply, remove the notes. If the idea survives without the training wheels, then you've earned it. Until then, it's just familiarity wearing the costume of knowledge. Confusion has a bad reputation. From the time you start school, you're trained to avoid it. If you look confused, you feel behind. If you admit confusion, you feel exposed. So most people learn to hide it, sometimes even from themselves. But confusion is not a weakness, it's a signal. In fact, it's one of the most reliable signs that real learning is happening. When everything feels clear all the time, you're probably operating inside the boundaries of what you already know. Your brain is matching patterns, recognizing familiar shapes, replaying stored answers. There's no friction. But friction is exactly what produces growth. Muscles don't grow without resistance, neither does understanding. The moment you encounter an idea that doesn't fit neatly into your existing mental framework, confusion appears. It's the brain saying, this doesn't connect yet. That yet is important. Because confusion is not the end of understanding, it's the beginning of restructuring. Imagine you've built a neat little model in your head of how something works. Then new evidence shows up that doesn't fit. You have two choices. You can ignore it to protect your comfort, or you can let it disturb your model. If you let it disturb you, your brain has to reorganize itself. That reorganization feels uncomfortable. It feels like mental instability. But that instability is progress. Most people retreat at that exact moment. They look for simpler explanations, quick summaries, or someone else's conclusion. They want the discomfort to go away. But if you always escape Confusio, and You never force your mind to rebuild itself. And rebuilding is the essence of learning. Think about solving a difficult problem. At first, nothing makes sense. You try one approach, it fails. You try another, it collapses. Frustration grows. That frustration is not evidence of inability, it's evidence that your brain is actively searching for a new structure. When the solution finally clicks, it feels almost magical. But that click is just the moment your mind successfully reorganizes itself. Without confusion, there is no click. Clarity that comes too easily is often shallow. Deep clarity is earned by sitting with confusion long enough to untangle it. There's also something honest about confusion. It forces you to admit, I don't fully understand this. That admission is powerful. It keeps you from pretending. It keeps you curious. Pretending to understand blocks learning because it shuts down inquiry. But genuine confusion keeps questions alive. Questions are the engine of understanding. If you never feel confused, you probably aren't asking hard enough questions. You're staying in safe territory. You're consuming information rather than wrestling with it. Confusion also teaches precision. When something doesn't make sense, you're forced to identify exactly what doesn't make sense. Is it the definition, the assumption, the connection between two steps? That investigation sharpens your thinking. You move from vague awareness to specific gaps. And specific gaps can be filled. Vague confidence cannot. There's a difference between productive confusion and passive overwhelm. Productive confusion has energy in it. It pushes you to explore, test, and rethink. Overwhelm happens when you try to absorb too much without structure. The solution isn't to avoid confusion. It's to break problems into smaller pieces and attack them one at a time. Each resolved confusion strengthens your mental framework. Over time, you begin to welcome confusion, not because it's pleasant, but because you recognize it as a doorway. When you feel that moment of, wait, this doesn't add up, you don't panic. You lean in. You know that right behind that discomfort is a deeper layer of understanding. Confusion is not a verdict on your intelligence. It's feedback from reality. It's reality telling you that your current model is incomplete. And incomplete models are exactly what learning exists to improve. So instead of running from confusion, treat it like a compass. It points directly to where growth is waiting. The discomfort is temporary. The clarity you earn from facing it is permanent. If you're confused, good. Stay there a little longer. That's where understanding is being built. If you cannot explain something in simple language, you probably do not understand it as well as you think you do. That statement may sound harsh, but it is incredibly practical. Simplicity is not the enemy of intelligence. It is the test of it. Complexity can be memorized. Simplicity has to be earned. When you first encounter a new idea, especially in a technical subject, it often arrives wrapped in jargon. Specialized words, formulas, and formal definitions give the idea an appearance of depth. And sometimes those tools are necessary. But jargon can also act like camouflage. It can hide gaps in understanding behind impressive vocabulary. It is very easy to repeat a definition exactly as it was written and feel knowledgeable. But repeating a sentence is not the same as grasping the mechanism behind it. If you change the wording slightly and the meaning suddenly becomes blurry, that is a warning sign. Real understanding is flexible. It survives paraphrasing. Try this experiment. Take any concept you believe you understand and imagine explaining it to a curious 12-year-old. You are not allowed to use technical terms unless you define them in plain language. You cannot say, it just works that way. You must explain why. As you begin, everything may seem fine. Then, somewhere in the middle, your explanation will hesitate. You will search for a simpler phrase and struggle to find one. That hesitation is revealing the exact boundary of your understanding. That boundary is valuable. It shows you where to dig. Simplicity forces clarity. When you remove complicated terminology, you are left with structure. What causes what? What depends on what? What assumptions are being made? If you cannot identify these relationships clearly, then your understanding is still fragile. There is also a difference between shortening something and simplifying it. Shortening is cutting words. Simplifying is refining meaning. A simple explanation is not shallow, it is precise. It strips away unnecessary decoration and exposes the core principle. The core principle is what gives the idea power. For example, you may memorize a formula and apply it mechanically. That might be enough to pass an exam. But if someone changes the problem slightly, you may freeze. However, if you understand why the formula works, what each part represents, and how the pieces interact, then even a new problem becomes manageable. You are no longer relying on memory. You are relying on structure. Explaining something simply also exposes hidden assumptions. Often what makes a topic confusing is not the main idea, but the unstated background behind it. When you try to express the idea plainly, you are forced to uncover those assumptions. You have to ask yourself, what must be true for this to make sense? That question deepens understanding. Another powerful effect of simple explanation is that it reveals contradictions. If your explanation conflicts with itself, you will hear it. When ideas remain abstract and internal, contradictions can hide comfortably. But when you speak them aloud in clear language, inconsistencies become obvious. Simplicity is a filter. Weak understanding cannot pass through it. This does not mean every subject can be reduced to a few sentences. Some ideas are inherently layered and require careful development. But even the most advanced concept has a foundation that can be expressed clearly. If the foundation is unclear, the higher layers will always feel unstable. There is a certain humility required to aim for simplicity. It requires admitting when you cannot explain something cleanly. It requires resisting the temptation to sound impressive. But the reward is strength. An idea you can explain simply is an idea you truly own. When you reach that level, something interesting happens. The subject no longer feels mysterious. It feels logical. It feels almost obvious. Not because it was easy, but because you have reconstructed it from the ground up. If you want to measure your understanding, do not ask how many pages you have read or how many definitions you can repeat. Ask whether you can explain the idea clearly, in plain language, without hiding behind complexity. If you can, then you understand it. If you cannot, you know exactly what to work on next. Memorization is seductive because it feels productive. You can see progress. You can check off boxes. You can recite facts, formulas, or procedures, and for a moment it feels like learning has happened. But memorization is a thin form of mastery. It creates confidence, but confidence without understanding is fragile. It is easy to forget, easy to misapply, and easy to be fooled by. Understanding, on the other hand, is heavy. It requires effort, patience, and humility, but it endures. Humility in learning comes from recognizing the limits of what you know. When you truly understand something, you are acutely aware of how much more there is to explore. This awareness is not discouragement, it is progress. It is the mind acknowledging the vastness of knowledge and knowing that every conclusion is provisional, every assumption subject to challenge. Memorization makes you feel smart because it is safe. Understanding makes you humble because it exposes gaps and invites correction. This humility is not passive. It drives curiosity. It pushes you to ask better questions, to look deeper, and to test what you think you know. Memorization, by contrast, often leaves the learner complacent. You can memorize a solution and feel accomplished without ever confronting the problem in its full complexity. You can repeat procedures without grasping the principles that govern them. Memorization protects ego. Understanding exposes it. Consider a student who memorizes a formula for solving quadratic equations. On a test with familiar problems, they succeed, but change the numbers or present the problem in a slightly different form, and the solution may crumble. Now consider someone who understands the derivation of the formula. They know why it works, how each term relates, and how the process generalizes. They can adapt, innovate, and apply the principle to problems they've never seen. Understanding transforms knowledge from a brittle script into a flexible tool. Humility also encourages continuous refinement. When you accept that your understanding is incomplete, you remain open to correction. You listen to alternative perspectives. You revisit your assumptions. You test your ideas against reality rather than ego. This cycle of testing, failing, and rebuilding strengthens comprehension far more than repeated memorization ever could. It is iterative, messy, and often frustrating, but it produces knowledge that survives scrutiny. There is another aspect to this humility. It teaches patience. Learning is not a race. It is not measured by how quickly you can consume information or how many facts you can recall. It is measured by how deeply an idea transforms your thinking. Memorization rewards speed. Understanding rewards depth. One can spend weeks wrestling with a single concept, feeling frustrated and inadequate, and come out with insight that a lifetime of memorization could never provide. Humility also fosters resilience. When your understanding is tested and you discover gaps, you are not embarrassed. You are motivated. You do not give up because reality has exposed your limits. You lean in. You reconstruct, experiment, and rebuild. That resilience comes from the confidence of knowing the process works. Memorization, by contrast, is brittle. The first time you are challenged, the foundation cracks. Finally, humility in learning transforms the way you relate to knowledge itself. You stop seeking approval or validation from others. You stop chasing grades, certificates, or applause. Instead, you focus on clarity, on correctness, and on coherence. You value truth over comfort. You are willing to admit when you are wrong and to explore uncertainty without fear. This mindset makes you a lifelong learner, capable of navigating complexity, ambiguity, and innovation. Memorization might make you appear intelligent. Understanding makes you powerful. The difference is humility. Memorization protects ego, understanding expands it. Memorization answers questions, understanding asks better ones. Memorization is temporary, understanding endures. And the only way to achieve that enduring understanding is to embrace the discomfort of realizing how little you know and letting that awareness guide every step of your learning journey. Learning is not about speed. Most people treat it like a race. How fast can you finish the chapter? How quickly can you memorize the facts? How many videos can you watch in a day? In this approach, learning becomes a performance metric, a checklist of completed tasks, rather than a process of understanding. But speed is largely irrelevant when it comes to real learning. Depth, not velocity, determines mastery. You can rush through 10 books and remember nothing, or you can wrestle with one idea for days and emerge transformed. The difference lies in how thoroughly you engage with the material. When you try to learn quickly, your brain tends to skim rather than absorb. You focus on surface details, definitions, formulas, and examples. These things are easy to capture, easy to recall, and easy to feel confident about. But they do not represent understanding. Understanding requires time, attention, and iteration. It requires sitting with a concept until it becomes uncomfortable, until your mental model strains under the weight of the idea, and until you can see where it bends and breaks. That is where regrowth occurs. Real learning is reconstruction. You are not merely adding information to your brain, you are reassembling the way you see the world. Each idea connects to existing knowledge, challenges assumptions, and reshapes mental frameworks. This process cannot be rushed because it involves internalizing relationships, testing boundaries, and correcting misconceptions. Rushing leads to gaps. Gaps may not be obvious at first, but they appear when you try to apply the idea in a new context. That is when superficial learning is exposed. There is another reason speed is counterproductive. It ignores the value of struggle. Struggle is often mistaken for difficulty or failure, but it is actually the engine of understanding. When you wrestle with a problem, your mind creates pathways it would not otherwise form. You are forced to confront inconsistencies, to think creatively, and to synthesize information in novel ways. The longer you engage with these challenges, the stronger and more flexible your understanding becomes. Speed sacrifices this struggle in favor of immediate satisfaction. Furthermore, real learning requires reflection. After wrestling with the concept, you must pause to examine what you have learned. What worked, what didn't, where did your assumptions mislead you? Reflection solidifies understanding. It integrates fragments of knowledge into coherent structures. Reflection is slow by nature, and it cannot be skipped without diminishing the quality of learning. The faster you move, the less opportunity there is for reflection, and the more likely knowledge will remain fragmented and unstable. It is also important to realize that real understanding is iterative. Revisiting an idea multiple times, approaching it from different angles, and reconstructing it repeatedly is far more valuable than a single exposure. Each iteration deepens comprehension, reveals hidden connections, and strengthens memory. This iterative approach cannot be hurried. True mastery emerges not from speed, but from deliberate, repeated engagement. Patience in learning develops discipline. When you accept that understanding takes time, you stop measuring yourself against others. You stop worrying about how quickly you are progressing. Instead, you focus on the integrity of your engagement with the material. You learn to tolerate ambiguity, to sit with uncertainty, and to persist through confusion. These qualities are essential not only for learning, but for thinking critically in life. Ultimately, speed is a superficial metric. Knowledge gained quickly is fragile. Knowledge gained through careful, deliberate effort endures. Real learning is not about how fast you can consume information. It is about how deeply you can internalize it, how flexibly you can apply it, and how accurately you can reconstruct it from first principles. If you want knowledge that lasts, you must slow down, embrace the struggle, and give your mind the time it needs to build understanding that cannot be easily shaken. One of the most overlooked truths about learning is that it is not about protecting your ego. Many people approach learning with the goal of appearing intelligent, impressive, or competent. They want to give the impression that they understand, even if they do not. They fear being wrong, embarrassed, or exposed. But real learning has no interest in appearances. It is messy, uncomfortable, and often humbling. The moment you prioritize looking smart over understanding, you trade curiosity for pretense, and true growth stalls. Learning begins with the courage to admit, I don't understand this yet. That small word, yet, carries enormous power. It transforms failure into possibility. It shifts focus from proving knowledge to pursuing it. When you accept that you do not have all the answers, your mind opens to exploration. You begin asking questions that matter, testing assumptions, and experimenting with ideas. Pretending to know shuts all of this down. A mind that is trying to appear smart is a mind that refuses to challenge itself. Real learning values questions over answers. Answers are final. Questions are beginnings. When you focus on answers, you risk stagnation. You memorize solutions and protect your status, but you rarely confront the underlying principles. When you focus on questions, you explore gaps, uncover contradictions, and build deeper understanding. Questions drive investigation. They provoke experimentation. They invite clarity. They remind you that knowledge is not a trophy to be displayed, but a process to be engaged with. Simplicity becomes a measure of your learning when ego is set aside. If you are concerned with appearances, you may rely on jargon, complicated explanations, or superficial tricks to sound intelligent. But simplicity reveals truth. If you can explain a concept plainly, without hiding behind complexity, then you truly understand it. Complexity can mask ignorance. Simplicity exposes it. The willingness to embrace simplicity, even when it feels exposing, is a hallmark of genuine comprehension. Facing your limitations is uncomfortable, but it is essential. Real learning forces you to confront gaps in understanding. It challenges assumptions and dismantles mental shortcuts. Each confrontation may feel like failure, but in reality, it is progress. When you admit that you do not yet understand something, you gain the freedom to explore it fully. When you stop worrying about looking competent, you gain the freedom to be curious, to experiment, and to reconstruct your understanding from the ground up. There is also a subtle but profound benefit to letting go of ego in learning, resilience. When you stop tying your self-worth to being right, failure becomes a tool instead of a threat. Mistakes are no longer embarrassing, they are informative. You can test, fail, adjust, and try again without fear. Each failure becomes data. Each correction strengthens your mental model. A resilient learner does not crumble under challenge, they adapt. A learner focused on ego crumbles the moment reality exposes their ignorance. Finally, real learning transforms your relationship with knowledge itself. It becomes an ongoing journey rather than a checklist. You stop seeking approval or validation from others. You stop chasing grades, accolades, or recognition. You seek clarity, correctness, and understanding. You value truth over comfort, and you begin to see learning not as an end, but as a continuous process of refinement, testing, and growth. When you let go of the ego, you discover the true power of learning, the ability to see clearly, think critically, and adapt intelligently. Knowledge is no longer a performance, it is a tool. Questions guide your exploration. Curiosity drives your efforts. Humility keeps you honest. Mistakes are lessons, not threats. And understanding is measured not by appearances, but by the depth, flexibility, and endurance of your comprehension. Learning in this way is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also transformative. It is the kind of learning that cannot be taken away, and the kind that reshapes not just what you know, but how you think.